My name is Terry Crews. I am an actor, author, former athlete, advocate, and a survivor of a sexual assault.
In 2017, in the midst of the Me Too movement, former NFL star and actor Terry Crews came forward with allegations of sexual assault. In a statement on his Twitter, Crews said, "This whole thing with Harvey Weinstein is kind of giving me PTSD. Why? Because this kind of thing happened to me. My wife and I were at a Hollywood function last year, and a high-level Hollywood executive came over to me and groped my privates. Jumping back, I said, 'What are you doing?' My wife saw everything and we looked at him like he was crazy. He just grinned like a jerk. I was going to kick his ass right then, but I thought twice about how the whole thing would appear. 240-pound black man stomps out Hollywood honcho would be the headline the next day. Only, I probably wouldn't have been able to read it because I would have been in jail. So we left." Crews later testified against the man that had assaulted him, who he identified as his then agent, Adam Bennett. In both his testimony and on his social media, Crews was asked why he didn't beat Bennett up and responded that as a black man living in America, he would have likely been penalized far more for harming Bennett than Bennett would be for sexually assaulting Crews in the first place.
The first reaction was to be violent. And I immediately held back.
Why weren't you? You're a big, powerful man. Why didn't you?
Senator, as a black man in America,
Say it as it is. I think it's important.
you only have a few shots at success. You only have a few chances to make yourself a viable member of the community. I'm from Flint, Michigan. I have seen many, many young black men who were provoked into violence, and they were in prison, or they were killed, and they're not here. My wife, for years, prepared me. She said, if you ever get goaded, if you ever get prodded, if you ever have anyone try to push you into any kind of situation, don't do it. Don't be violent.
Crews's point is hardly unsupported. There are frequent news reports of racial profiling in America, and black men are more likely to be incarcerated than white men, despite no evidence that they commit crimes at a higher rate. For many white Americans, their perception of black men is tainted by the racist stereotype of the scary black man.
When I got stopped the other day, I wasn't a cop. I wasn't a guy who lived in the neighborhood looking for his daughter's toy. I was a black man, a dangerous black man. That's all he could see.
So, where did this stereotype come from? It has origins as far back as the 17th century, when a set of laws called the slave codes came into place in America. These laws existed to regulate slaves or anyone opposed to slavery. Under the slave codes, black people were legally given a harsher punishment, sometimes even death, by brutal methods for the same crimes that whites were given more lenient punishments for. If a black person was the victim of a crime, the perpetrator of the crime would be given a more lenient punishment, sometimes even no punishment, than if a white person was the victim of the same crime. In some instances, things were only considered crimes when done by African Americans. Slaves had to face legal punishments for insulting or provoking white people, and it was illegal for more than 7 black men to congregate without a white person also there. Many slave owners feared the possibility of their slaves starting a rebellion. These slave owners perpetrated the idea that black men were dangerous and uncivilized. Starting in 1704, slave patrols were created where groups of white men would approach black people who weren't on plantations and interrogate them. If the black people being interrogated could not provide evidence that they were either slaves with permission to be off the plantations or that they had been liberated, the slave patrollers would assault or sometimes even kill them. In 1865, America replaced the slave codes with a set of laws called the Black Codes. The Black Codes put legal barriers in the way of African Americans getting good jobs. A black person who wanted a job that fell under the restrictions of the Black Codes was required to get court approval, pay a fee, and obtain a license for that job, which could then be revoked at any given time. In place of the slave codes mandating that black people faced harsher legal punishments for crimes, the practice of lynching began. Lynching was a practice largely associated with the Ku Klux Klan, although it was not only Klansmen who participated. Lynching involved brutally assaulting or killing African Americans who had been accused of crimes against whites, or who had done anything that might be considered offensive to white people, even something as simple as swearing or acting boastful. Despite the murder of a black person now legally being considered a crime, white people who participated in lynching rarely had to face legal consequences. In the 1980s, then-President Ronald Reagan started the war on drugs. Communities with high black populations were heavily targeted, and blacks and Latin Americans were arrested and incarcerated at a higher rate than any other race. This perpetuated the association of drugs and criminality with people of color, and African Americans in particular. Today, the slave codes are long gone, and lynching is considered a horrible crime. However, the problem of a discriminatory legal system continues. Black and Latino people make up almost 80% of those in federal prison for drug offenses, whereas white people are often given lenient sentences or punishments for the same crimes. People of color, especially black people, are frequently targeted by police for no reason other than their skin color, and those like Terry Crews, the victim of an illegal sexual assault, are left thinking twice about even acting in self-defense, for fear that they will be seen as nothing more than scary black men.